Okay, so in this tutorial, we're going to learn how to create a glitch effect all in Photoshop. Hey guys, you're watching Dansky, the place to be to develop your creative skills, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to create an awesome glitch effect that you can apply to text, images, anything you like. And before we kick things off, the eagle-eyed among you may have noticed that this is not my regular laptop. This is actually the P65 Creator laptop, and this video is in partnership with MSI. So first off, thank you to MSI for sending me this beast of a laptop. It's awesome, but also a shout out to all the Windows users. This tutorial is for you. And for anyone who loves tech specs, this beast is rocking a 9th gen i9 processor, 32 gigs of RAM, a terabyte of SSD storage, and a frickin' RTX 2070 for the graphics with 8 gigs of VRAM. And for any creators or creative professionals, the 4K screen has 100% Adobe RGB color accuracy, which is pretty essential for most types of creative work. So in this tutorial, we're going to be using a bunch of filters and effects that are quite demanding on the hardware, but if you have older hardware, don't worry, I'm going to include a few tips so you can follow along with the tutorial. So anyway, without further ado, let's jump to the screen and get started. Rightio, so we're now in Photoshop and you can see I have a new document, and if I go up to image, down to image size, you can see I'm working with a canvas of 3840 by 2160, essentially 4K. Now if you're on older hardware, I'd probably bring this size down a little bit, so we could go for something like 1920 by 1080. And you can also bring the resolution down as well, so you could go for something like 72 dpi. It's just going to take a little bit of the load off of your computer, but we're using the P65 here, so I'm going to keep this at 4K. Okay, so new document, check. I'm going to go up here and I've got my image of a subject. And if I go up to select, down to all, edit and copy, it's going to copy this to the clipboard. And if I jump back to my main document, I can paste this in. And you can see it's absolutely massive. Now the first thing I'm going to do before I do anything is right click this and select Convert to Smart Object. Now what is a smart object? Well, a smart object is awesome. In fact, smart objects are just amazing all round. So what you can do with smart objects is essentially it's like Photoshop taking a snapshot of that image at that size. And because I've not scaled it down or anything, it snapshots this image at a high res, so I can reduce the size, I can bring it up, I can bring it back down, bring it back up, and it won't lose any quality. If you do that without it being a smart object, you're going to scale it down, bring it back up, it's going to pixelate and look terrible. Something else we can also do is we can add smart filters. So essentially normal filters, we can edit them, we can delete them, we get a lot more flexibility. And what we can also do, if that wasn't enough, is we can double click on the thumbnail, go inside the smart object, make changes, save it, come back out. Essentially, it's like a document inside a document. I'm getting way too excited about smart objects, so I'm going to calm down and we'll go back to the screen. So yes, excitement aside, we have our smart object. I'm going to double click this and call it subject. And now it's a smart object, we can zoom out and just go to edit, free transform, and I'm going to scale this down. Depending on your Photoshop version and preferences, you're going to either hold shift or not hold shift. Essentially, we want it to not do that because that is bad. So I'm going to reposition this, get a nice crop there, double click or press return to set that transformation. And there we go, we've got our subject in our main document. And we can close this down now. Let's try again. There we go. Okay, so we have our subject. Fantastic. Now what I'm going to do is right click on this layer and select duplicate layer. And you could give this a name. I'll call this subject grayscale. Press return and we have a duplication. Next I can go up to image, down to adjustments and select hue and saturation. We're going to bring the saturation slider all the way to the left, essentially stripping out the color so we have a black and white image. And you can see that becomes listed under there as a smart filter, so we can turn it off and back on, or we can double click to go and edit it. So I'm going to right click on this layer and go to blending options. And from the first screen, I'm just going to deselect the red channel. You can do this with the other ones, but for this tutorial, I'm going to deselect this one here. Click OK, and you can see it does something like this. Now, if I move this around, this layer, you can see we get this really cool kind of anaglyphic 3D effect. Now you can move this up and down. I would recommend going to the left and the right. So we'll undo that, and I'm just going to hold shift as well so it stays perfectly horizontal, and just offset that a little bit like so. So we get this kind of cool distortion effect. So yeah, that's fantastic. Next we're going to add our wave effect. This is really cool. So go to filter, down to distort, select wave, and we get this box pop up here. Now we do get a preview, but it's very, very small. So because we're using a smart object, we can add this wave distortion effect. We can then see how it looks. If it's wrong, we can just go back and edit it. So we get that flexibility, which is great. Just be careful when you add a lot of smart objects to a document. It's going to become pretty demanding on your computer. So just make sure you've got some good hardware before adding loads of these to a document. Okay, so you can see the preview there. It looks a little bit wibbly wobbly. We'll click OK. That is not a glitch effect, but that's fine. We'll double click on wave here. We'll go back in, and I've got a few settings that hopefully I can memorize. So I'm going to use something like this. Oh, no, 1 is the lowest value. So don't try and input 0. We'll go 87, horizontal 20. Hopefully my memory is as good as I think it is. And I'm going to go with square here for the type as well. Click OK. And there we go. So something a little bit more reminiscent of a glitch. So I could go back in again and I could edit this. So if I bring up the amplitude, you can see in that preview what each slider does. So if you squint at the screen really closely, you kind of get a good idea of what each one does. But if not, just, you know, have a go and then go back in and adjust it. So the wavelength, we could maybe try and adjust this. Number of generators, you can see that goes absolutely crazy. So we're going to keep that quite low, but depending on the size of your image, these settings might be different. So there we go. That's a nice glitch effect. I like that. But we can actually go filter, distort, and wave, and we can actually stack these up. We can stack multiple effects. So I'm going to change the generators to 2, maybe bring this up, the amplitude, keep that nice and low, change the vertical scaling to 1. And that does very little, but you know, we still get more and more glitch. So you could keep stacking these up. I've kind of making this up as I go along, but I think that looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. So another benefit of smart objects, as I very excitedly mentioned before, is that because we made this at the beginning, this smart object is a duplication of the first image. So for either of these, we can double click to go inside. We have this image here. So I could add a new layer, grab a red, add a brush stroke like this. And then if I go and try and close this down, it will say, do you want to save? I can click yes. And it will take me back to the original document. And you can see it's applied this big blurry line to both of these images. So if we wanted to drop in, let's say, a different image after we've created our glitch effect, we just go into the smart object, add in the new image here, save it, close it, and then we've got a brand new image with our glitch applied to it. So you don't have to go and recreate the same effect over and over and over again. So okay, we've got rid of that horrible red line, so we'll just put this back to how it was. There we go. Fantastic. So we have our subject there. Now what we're going to actually do is we are actually going to double click this and go back inside. And I've got my other image here. This is a scene that I'm going to just add to the background. So again, we're going to go to select all, edit and copy. Switch over to inside our smart object and we're going to paste it inside there. We can close this down now. And as per our other images, I'm going to, of course, make this a smart object. We'll just call this background because naming your layers is always good practice. And of course, it's very small now. So it's in the center by default. So I'm going to go to edit and free transform. Now you can scale by holding shift or not holding shift as the case may be, but also hold down alt or option and you'll scale from the center. So we can scale this up so it fills our canvas and maybe just position this like so. So I'll adjust the crop, double click to set that transformation. And I'm just going to drag this layer underneath the subject. So there we go, that's cool. Now what I'm going to do is actually select the subject. Now you can cut out your subject a number of different ways. I've actually done a bunch of different videos on it that you can check out on my Photoshop playlist. I'm going to do this the really quick and lazy way. Select subject. This was added in like Photoshop 2018 or 2019. It's incredibly useful because I don't actually need to make a very detailed selection here. So I can now add a layer mask, and you can see I could go and refine this, but I'm gonna skip that for now. But I am just going to grab the quick selection tool here and just remove some of this. So just brush in there. If you catch anything by mistake, just hold down Alt or Option. You can see it changes to a minus, and we can just bring that back in. And we can adjust the selection brush size by using the left and right square brackets on the keyboard. So I'll make that nice and small for some more detailed areas. Just make sure we don't remove anything essential like fingers. Fingers are always essential. And we've got a little piece down there. Now we've already added our layer mask, but remember, black will remove from the layer mask, white will bring back in. So what I'm going to do is grab my brush tool over here, just make sure I've got one of Photoshop's soft, round, pressure opacity brushes, hardness of 0, the size is up there nice and big. And I've got to make sure black is my foreground color. Remember, so we brush out of the mask, and you can see where I brush, it then hides. If I press X on the keyboard, that's a shortcut to switch the foreground and background color around. I can bring it back in. So again, masks, a lot of flexibility and a very non-destructive way of working. So we can deselect that now. And we have a terrible, very quick cutout onto a background. So what I can actually do is save this now. And I can actually keep this open in its own tab up here, jump back to this document, and you can see our glitch effect is now applied to the background as well. So what I'm going to do is actually jump back in here, and I'm going to duplicate this layer. I'm going to drag this to the bottom and just click on this layer mask, right click and delete. And what I'm going to do with the background image is actually go up to Filter, down to Blur Gallery and select Tilt Shift. Now, all of these blur gallery effects, they require some serious computational power. So if you don't have like a powerful computer, if you don't have a P65, then just be warned, this may be pretty demanding on your computer. Your computer might melt is what I'm trying to say. So we'll click on Tilt Shift. Now, if you are on slightly slower hardware, a really good tip for this is actually to turn off preview. Because if you keep it turned on, it gives you a real-time preview as you move everything around. So every time you adjust anything, it will render that preview. And if you're using quite strong blurs, it can take quite a long time. So if you keep it turned off, just make any adjustments you like, and then when you're ready to preview, turn it on, and then you see it in all its glory. But because I'm using this beast, I'm going to crank up the blur and just move this around, and you'll see I get a real-time preview. I don't know what that black bar is there, but you can see on the rest of the image, it just absolutely breezes through this. So I'm going to make sure I bring this down nice and low. So essentially what I'm going for here is I'm adjusting these sliders. You can see here I can adjust the distance of the depth of field. I want to blur out the background. The background is really far away, the subject is close, so the subject will be in focus, the background is going to be further away. But this part of the background is further away than this part. So I'm going to adjust this until I get a blur that I'm happy with. And then once I'm happy with it, I can bring it down from some ridiculous number to something a bit more suitable, like this. And because I'm going to be greedy, I'm gonna check high quality. Okay, I think I'm just showing off at this point. And you can see, even on powerful hardware, it still takes a little bit of time just to render that effect. And we get this super cool graduated tilt shift blur. Now this bit down here is still in the background. It will need a bit of blur, but because we're using a smart object, I can go to Filter, down to Blur, select Gaussian Blur, and I could add, say, 9. So you can increase this up just to blur this bottom part of the image here. It will blur everything else, but this is already blurred, so it's gonna blend really well. So we'll go with 8. And you can see I've got all of this here. I can double click to go back inside my blur gallery, and I can change that. So again, the beauty of smart objects is you just get that flexibility. So there we go, we've got our background, we've added some blur. I'm actually going to bring the opacity of this down just a little bit so it's a bit more subtle and it kind of blends into this subject copy layer at the bottom. And then I can just save that. The shortcut for this is up here under File. So there we go, we've got the Save shortcut, Command or Control S. I'll leave it open in case I need to come back to it, but we can jump back into this document. And there we go, we've got our subject, our background, it's all glitched and everything's looking awesome. Now I'm going to jump back in here, and what I'm going to do is just add an adjustment layer to the background because it doesn't quite match the darkness of the subject. The subject's very dark, the background is quite light. So we'll add an adjustment layer, we'll go for curves. Now I want this to only affect the layer below it. So what I can do is I can right click on the curves adjustment layer, click create clipping mask, and you can see it adds a little arrow to the layer below it. The layer below it becomes underlined, and what this indicates is if I make any adjustments, it's only affecting that layer below. So I'm going to bend this line down a little bit. You can see it becomes a lot darker, and it just matches with our subject a bit more. So I can turn it off and back on. So we'll save that one again, and it just takes a moment and it will update that into the main document. So there we go, they blend together a bit more. Okay, so now we're going to add some adjustment layers. So let's go down here to the adjustment icon. We're going to add a color balance adjustment layer. It's a little bit greeny at the moment, so I'm going to adjust some of the colors to get a bit more blue in there. Now color balance is essential, it's so important. You can adjust the shadows, midtones and the highlights and the colors within those ranges. So you can see I can introduce more blue into the midtones. I can take the shadows and make them a bit more red, add some green. So you can adjust these sliders. And this is great, even if you don't know what you're doing. You can just adjust the sliders and you get a real-time preview of how it's affecting everything. So I could go for something like this, looking pretty cool. Maybe just a little bit more on the shadows, a bit more blue. Okay, that looks good to me. I could play around with this forever. In fact, you can, because it's an adjustment layer, just double click the thumbnail and you get all these options that you can go back in and edit. So I'm also going to add another adjustment layer. We'll go with curves just to brighten this up a little bit. So I'm just going to click anywhere on the line and just move that up a little bit, like so. You can see it just brightens the image, and I'm going to leave these adjustment layers at the top just so they affect everything below them. So next what I'm going to do is just click on this subject layer and we'll add another adjustment layer, solid color. Click OK, and we have red by default. And if I change the blending mode from normal to overlay, you can see it does this. And we can click on our mask and use black and a nice soft brush. We can adjust the brush size with the left and right square brackets on the keyboard, and I can just brush this away. Now this looks kind of cool. Now I've made that masking, I can actually double click the thumbnail and I can go and change this. So this looks pretty cool. I could go for something like this, and you can adjust this here, bring the saturation down a bit. So again, you get all that flexibility. You can adjust that color by clicking the thumbnail, and I can bring the opacity down as well if it's just a bit too punchy. And you can see I can turn that off and back on. Okay, so this is coming together really nicely, but there are a few more things we can do just to make this even more glitchy. So we'll jump back into it. Okay, I'm just going to click on the subject grayscale here. What we can do is go to the bottom of the layers panel, add a new layer, and just make sure that black is the foreground color. And just select the fill bucket here, the paint bucket tool. And it's usually hidden under the gradient tool. We'll just fill this with black, right click, convert to a smart object, and I'm going to call this mezzotint. And you'll see why in a moment, because we're going to go up to filter, down to pixelate, and select mezzotint. And there's lots of different options here. You can preview these like so. I'm going to select long strokes, click OK, and it looks like this. In fact, if I just turn off these adjustment layers, you can see it looks like that, which is no good because we can't actually see our image. But if we change the blending mode from normal to typically one of these 5 in this section, I like lighten and screen the most, you can see it blends all that black through. And we can actually right click this, go to blending options, and do the same thing and deselect the red channel. And it gives it that turquoisey teal effect as well. And you can deselect the other channels if you like. So it's a little bit everywhere at the moment, so we will add a layer mask. grab our brush tool. It's pretty big, which is good. I'll just make it a little bit smaller and just brush some of this away. We don't want mezzotint absolutely everywhere. I just want it around certain parts of the subject. Just around the edge, just like this. So I'm just brushing this in and out in a few different places. And I could even drop the opacity down as well, just so it's not too strong. So something like 50%, really subtle. You can see it's just another thing that adds to this overall glitch effect. And now we can turn the adjustment layers we've created on one by one. That's looking pretty cool. Okay, so we're nearly there now. There's just one more thing we can do to really kind of customize our glitch in any way that we like. So at the moment, this is very, very editable. We can actually go into the smart object, double click, add a new subject image in there, save and close, and just maybe adjust that mezzotint. And you've got all of these different options that you can apply to your new image, but you can go and edit them. So we have a lot of flexibility. But if we're totally happy with what we've created here, and we want to glitch it up even more, we can go inside our subject smart object. And you can see we have the original there. We have a copy at the top and the background. Now I'm just going to take this subject at the top, convert to a smart object, and then just rasterize it, essentially just making it a normal layer in Photoshop. And I'm going to grab the marquee tool, left click, and just start dragging around. So I'm going to create something like this. Now if I hold down Shift and keep this held, you can see the plus icon appears, and I'm going to create a few different ones at different sizes. I'm going to vary the size as well, just to keep things interesting. Maybe vary the length for some of these. And you can spend a lot longer doing this if you like. There we go. That's looking pretty cool to me. And then I'm actually going to create a new layer. And I can just go and fill this with, well, we'll just go with bright red for now. So just use the paint bucket tool, click anywhere inside this, and we can deselect that there. And we've now essentially got this as a guide. So I can move this around, adjust the position, and then I'm just going to turn it off. And I'll call it guide. And then what I can do is hover over the thumbnail and hold Command or Control. You'll see this icon appears. I can click this and make a selection from this. So then what I can do is actually select my subject layer below it. Remember, this is just the subject like this, very badly cut out, but still just the subject. And if you've still got the marquee tool selected up here, just make sure you switch over to the move tool. That's V on the keyboard as a shortcut. And then what you can do is use the left and right arrow keys on your keyboard, and you can move your subject out of line in those selected areas. So we're kind of creating our own glitch effect. So I could do that like so, and just deselect that. And essentially we've gone from this, where's the redo? Edit, no redo. Fine, we'll do it again. So we just make that selection and just shift it out using the move tool. Either way, left or right, up or down, we've gone to that. So we've kind of created our own glitch effect. And we could make that selection again, and we could shuffle it out even more. You can get as crazy and creative as you like here. This is kind of like a very final manual way of doing it if you want to fine tune your glitch to be exactly where you want it. So when you're happy with your glitch effect, we're going to save again. And it updates those smart objects. We close it down, and then it will bring all those changes back into our main document. Okay, so I can make some last minute tweaks now. I could go and just grab the mezzotint, maybe just bring that down a little bit to 30%. We could double click on color balance, maybe adjust this a little bit more. Something like that. I could even go and add another adjustment layer, a hue saturation one. Just bring the saturation down, not all the way to the left, but just down a little bit, just so it takes out just a little bit of that punchy blueness. But yeah, there we go. We get maximum flexibility over everything in our scene, and that's how you create an awesome glitch effect all in Photoshop. So thanks again to MSI for sponsoring this video. This is the P65 Creator laptop. If you'd like to find out more information about this absolute beast, there is a link in the video description where you can check it out. But as always, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Questions or comments, you know what to do, drop those down below. But as always, like this video if you enjoyed it, take care, and I'll see you next time.